The economic class you belong to determines how you think about money, what risks you take, what investments you consider accessible, and whether you feel wealthy or broke. The problem is the definitions are outdated, reasonably useless, and politically motivated. Most people have no idea where they actually stand.
Gap between what the government calls the economic classes and what the classes actually experience has never been wider. Understanding where you actually sit in the economic distribution is the first step to making rational decisions about your money. Most people are either overestimating or underestimating their position, and both errors are expensive.
The mission is to shine the light into the darkness.
Let's start with the actual income distribution in America because most people have no idea where they sit. The bottom 20% of households earn under $30,000 a year. The middle 60%, what most people call the middle class, earn between $30,000 and $130,000. The top 20% earn above $130,000, and the top 1% start at around $600,000 annually.
If your household earns $75,000 a year, you are in the top 40% of American earners. If you earn $100,000, you are in the top 30%. Most people who consider themselves solidly middle class are actually in the upper half of the income distribution. They just don't feel like it.
Someone earning $80,000 in rural Mississippi lives very differently than someone earning $80,000 in San Francisco. The number is identical, but the purchasing power is not even close. Because feeling wealthy is relative to your environment, not your position in the national distribution.
In 1971, 61% of American adults lived in middle-income households. Today, that number is 50%. The middle class split. The share of adults in lower income tiers grew from 25% to 29%. The share in upper income tiers grew from 14 to 21%. The middle is getting thinner from both ends.
And the assets tell a starker story than the income does. The bottom 50% of Americans own approximately 2% of the nation's total wealth. The top 10% own 70%. You can have a middle class income and a lower class balance sheet,
which is the dirty secret of the American middle class. The income looks okay on paper. The net worth is another conversation entirely.
In absolute terms, and what your money can actually buy, the average American today is significantly wealthier than the average American 50 years ago. A middle-class household in 2026 has access to technology, healthcare, transportation, and food variety that a wealthy household in 1975 could not purchase at any price.
The smartphone in your pocket contains more computing power than existed in the entire world in 1970. You have access to the sum of human knowledge for free. You can FaceTime anyone, anywhere, at no cost. Streaming gives you more entertainment than any one person could consume in a lifetime. In consumption terms, the middle class today lives better than kings did a century ago.
That argument is true, but it's also incomplete. Wealth is partly about what you can buy and partly about your position relative to others in your society. Housing, healthcare, and education. The three things that determine long-term financial security have outpaced wage growth by massive margins over 50 years. You may have a better smartphone than your grandparents did. You almost certainly have a worse shot at owning a home than them. Here's the framework I use when thinking about economic class as it relates to investing. Forget the government definitions. Ask three questions. 1, does your income exceed your expenses with enough left over to invest consistently? 2, do you own assets that appreciate rather than just liabilities that depreciate? 3, is your financial position more stable today than it was 5 years ago? If the answer to all three is yes, you are building wealth regardless of what income bracket a government table puts you in. If the answer to any of them is no, that's where the work is.
And the most important insight from looking at how class has shifted over time is that income alone never built generational wealth. Assets do. The people who moved from middle class to upper class over the last 50 years almost universally did it through asset ownership, not through earning more salary.
With all that being said, Bull, how do you feel overall about the state of economic classes today versus economic classes in the past?
I know a lot of people may not feel this way, but the average American today is infinitely wealthier than a king 500 years ago and wealthier than most people in the past. And the reason is because the average American today might not have a lot of money in your bank account, or, you might not own real estate or stocks or whatever, but the average American has a smartphone in their pocket, right? They have access to too many calories. 500 years ago, people were starving to death, right? The king would spend weeks to put on this massive feast that you could probably go to the grocery store and get that many calories in an hour today. If you get the flu today, you're probably okay, versus if you got the flu 500 years ago, you might be dead. So many things, so many ways our lives have improved. There's so many ways it's gotten worse because of a lot of technology we've made. But I think overall, we're wealthier, quote unquote.
I agree with that as far as like overall we are wealthier, but I think there's an argument to be made that, let's say you took a king from another century that's one of the top 1%. Like, let's say you talk to him like, hey man, you can continue to be a king here and be top 1%, one of the wealthiest dudes of your time, or we can bring you to 2026 and you can be middle class and you're gonna have access to way more technology and stuff, but you won't be the king. Like, I feel like,
you know what you would say?
what?
You would pull out your smartphone and pull up Flappy Bird or whatever. You'd be like, what wizardry is this? I need this power. He would be so incredibly impressed by just that he would.
That's true, but do you think that will fade
just lost
after like
his
a few
wife
years?
to childbirth? He probably just lost his other wife before that to the pox or whatever. Like their lives sucked, dude. I'm sorry,
But not necessarily. We say their lives suck because we're comparing it to all the stuff we have. But like, and I agree with the fact that, like, hey, yes, he would. His first
There was
exposure
probably a
to it, like,
famine going on at the time.
But I will argue that if you brought him here and he lived here for 5 years, he would be like, take me back. I want to be the king again in my own time.
Okay, so king specifically, obviously there's like the social aspect of, people will literally treat you differently. That's the
part. That's part of economic class, though.
That definitely is. That is definitely part of it. So yes, so that's a very good point. Like, in terms of social status and whatnot, you're probably not wealthier than a king. Of course not. But in terms of, physical, needs being met, I think you can claim that you're wealthier than a king. And like, in terms of access to information, even, I think you literally can go on Wikipedia and learn anything that humans know outside of like government secrets and whatever. But like, that information is probably more valuable than any social status that you could ever have, right? Knowledge is power. Today's the best time to be alive.
Okay, but you have to admit though, when you're in the 1%, you're in a bit of a bubble from a lot of stuff that's going on.
So much. Okay. But like, so much of what I enjoy about being, and maybe it's because, I'm a robot and I like technology and whatever, but like, maybe if you lived out in the woods or you were the type of person who just was a socialite or something and you only cared about, social status, then sure, that's a good trade. But for me, the access to there's just so much, like, even in 1926, if your wife was pregnant with a baby, you would have to worry. It wouldn't be a celebration. It'd be like, oh my gosh, there's like a 50% chance that, I lose my wife. Like, today it's a congratulations. It's a great thing. So like, that difference is just so valuable that I would not trade it. I'm sorry. Maybe back to 1996, maybe.
For sure you would do. You're bluffing if you say you wouldn't do that.
All right.
I'm calling you. You would definitely do that.
I'd go 96. I'd go 96, but not much further. Even 86, maybe. But I don't think things were better back then. I think people like to like romanticize the past, but things have only gotten better. That's all I can say. And that's mainly because of technology.
But has everything gotten better?
There are bad things that have come from technology for sure, but like, what hasn't gotten better?
I think that's simplicity. When I talk to like older people, they freaking light up with joy when they talk about some of the stuff they did back in the day that we would
Skipping
consider
stones
lame.
at the pond or whatever.
Exactly. They talk about it like they freaking went to an amusement park or something.
Yeah.
They're like, yeah, we used to go down to the lake and
Right.
throw some rocks and we had a great time.
Right.
So I think the fact that people could get joy from doing simple stuff as skipping rocks on a pond is
Yeah.
that's pretty
That's-
cool to me. I'll be honest.
That goes to, like we talked in the other episode about dopamine. Like, we get so many dopamine hits from TikTok and all that stuff that like we need way more dopamine than, you know, just skipping rocks at the pond, versus they, you know, their dopamine levels were way lower, so skipping a rock was really fun for them. So like, yes, you could argue that was better back then, but like today we actually care about mental health. So like, if you were unhealthy back then and you weren't happy skipping rocks at the pond, like, too bad. Today it's like, okay, well, someone will hold your hand through life and, you know, talk to you about your feelings and all that. Whether you think that's good or bad, I don't know, but I do think it's an improvement over back when you just got to man up, you know, like, be tough.
Yeah, I mean, man, it was definitely a lot of it was a lot of differences.
But
between-
I do want to bring it back to what we're talking about. We're not really comparing to the past so much. We're talking about like economic classes today. So let's talk about,
yeah,
so there's lower, middle, and upper class. How do you feel about those definitions?
I think people don't appreciate what they have enough, because even if you're in the lower class in America, you have so much more than so many other places in the world.
100%. Not glamorizing, you know, being poor in America. If you're on food stamps and, you know, EBT and whatever, you're still better nourished than most of the people in Darfur or, you know, Somalia or wherever. We complain about the healthcare system, and it is really a huge issue, how expensive it is. But if I collapse in the middle of the street, there's a hospital, I'll be hit with a massive bill, but I will be treated for the heart attack I had or whatever. There's so much we can improve, but there's food, there's healthcare, there's technology, everything that we have in this country. The things that we're actually complaining about are things like, oh, well, I can't make rent, or I can't pay my phone bill or whatever. And again, I don't want to glamorize, you know, being poor, but you could be living, like you were saying, homeless. And still, if you're in America, there's certain minimum benefits that you have.
I think people just live above their means in every single class. And I think that's the biggest issue. Whether you're lower, whether you're middle, whether you're
Right.
upper class, people live above their means. And I think a lot of people just don't realize how much less they could have. And the classes have changed so much too, that a lot of people that think they're lower class are actually middle class.
There's no like real
I'll find
definition
it.
for it though. You could make $40,000 a year, but let's say you were passed down a mansion by your parents, you might be making lower class money, but you'd probably be hanging out in upper class circles because you live in a super nice neighborhood. You know what I mean? So like, the definition isn't based on money alone. It's based on societal status,
That's a
everything.
really-
Like certain professions might not get paid a lot, but they're really respected.
That's a really great point, because you're right. The numbers that define your economic class, they only tell a portion of the story.
People put themselves in these categories, but the categories, as we're finding out, aren't even real. Like lower class and middle class people, so many people think that they're middle class, but they're making below the wage to be considered lower class, and then vice versa. But then there's a lot of people who are actually upper class. You only need to be making,
The number you're looking for is above 130,000. That's
Yeah.
as a household. So
Right.
like that doesn't even mean just one person. You could be a married couple making 131,000.
but 130,000 in Mississippi is different than California. And there's so many people who are, you know, software engineers making $250,000 who are still like, oh man, I can't find any money.
And that's why a lot of it comes down to mindset, because it might be somebody in New York that's making $65,000 a year. And for New York standards and the cost of living, they could be somebody who's struggling day to day. So do we feel bad for that person when we know that you could easily pack up and move to like Alabama or something like that, and your $65,000 a year could go way longer? And I know it's more nuanced than that, because you got family, you got roots, you got ties. So I'm not necessarily siding with either side, but I'm just saying people are more hesitant, especially somebody who grew up in a larger city. They're more hesitant to move to some small backroads town just to save money.
With all that being said, Bear, would you rather be middle class today or a billionaire 100 years ago?
That's a good question. And I'm a robot. So as a robot, I think I would scare too many people with going back in the past. But if I was, let's say, maybe a Caucasian human and I had the choice to be a king in, the 1700s, or a average Caucasian male in 2026 in middle class, I might have to pick the king. I'm not going to lie to you. I might be the king.
We want to hear what you guys have to say. Would you rather be a middle-class citizen today or a king 1,000 years ago? Drop your take in the comments. Subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. And remember,
This is all just for stocks and giggles.